The first time my dead husband told the truth about me, my brother-in-law tried to silence him. Patrick's thumb was already pressing down on the remote when the voice came through the museum speakers. My voice, 14 years younger, stripped thin by radio compression. Calm in the way people sound when panic has become a luxury no one can afford. Lantern assumes command. Patrick froze, not for long. Half a second, maybe less, but I had spent 20 years watching men make decisions under pressure. Half a second was enough to tell me he had recognized danger before anyone else in the room understood there was any. Beside me, my daughter stopped breathing. "Mom," Ava whispered. "That's you," I did not answer. Above the stage, a convoy map glowed against the darkened wall. 23 small markers sat motionless on a road none of the donors could name. A line of radio static rolled through the speakers. Somewhere inside it, a man said, "Copy Lantern." The room changed. Not dramatically, no one stood, no one gasped. A camera near the front slowly lowered. An old soldier 3 rows ahead leaned forward. My mother-in-law turned away from the portrait of Michael on stage and looked directly at me. Patrick still had his thumb on the remote. He had promised everyone the recording was uncut. If he stopped it now, they would ask why. In my coat pocket, my fingers closed around the softened edge of a postcard Michael had mailed me after that mission. The paper had gone almost smooth from 14 years of being carried, folded, moved, and put away again. On the memorial wall, a paper poppy caught the air from a ceiling vent and flipped backward. For one strange second, the flower disappeared, and all I could see was the small silver pin holding it in place. Then the younger version of me spoke again. 3 weeks earlier, the invitation had arrived in an envelope thick enough to survive a war. Cream paper, raised lettering, the Donovan Valor Foundation seal pressed into the flap. Patrick believed weight made things official. A story did not have to be completely true to become permanent. It only had to be repeated in expensive places. Ava found the invitation beneath one of her design sketches. Graphite covered the side of her hand, and when she passed me the envelope, she left a gray fingerprint across Patrick's embossed seal. Inside was a seating card, Claire Donovan, widow and family witness. I read it twice. The absence of my rank did not bother me. I had retired as a major 2 years earlier after my final assignment at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The compression injury low in my back still tightened whenever I sat too long, but the memorial was supposed to honor Michael, not the years the Army had left inside my body. But family witness was not a neutral phrase. Witnesses stand outside events. They watch, they wait, they survive whatever happens to other people. The program listed military historians, former members of Michael's team, Foundation executives, and donors who had never met him. My name appeared beside a paragraph about the wife who had waited faithfully through dangerous deployments. Nothing about the operation cell, nothing about the broken command net. Nothing about the 23 vehicles that moved because I told them to move. I set the card on the table. Ava reached beneath it and pulled out the postcard. She had seen it in my wallet for years. She knew it belonged to her father. She did not know why I carried it. The picture showed a lighthouse standing above a gray ocean. Michael had bought it in an airport gift shop hundreds of miles from the nearest coast because, as he once told me, the military had trained him to appreciate bad maps and worse jokes. On the back, in his narrow, slanted handwriting, he had written, "You kept the light on. We followed it home." Ava pressed the curled corners flat with the metal ruler from her drafting kit. What did he mean? He meant we were working the same problem from different places. The answer was true, and that was the danger. Michael had gone into the street. I had spoken into a radio inside a fortified operations room. His courage photographed well. Mine existed in decisions no camera had been pointed toward. "Were you there?" Ava asked. The kitchen went quiet around us. The refrigerator motor cut off. A delivery truck reversed somewhere down the block, its warning tone repeating every 4 seconds. Her pencil rolled slowly toward the edge of the table and fell. "I was in the region," I said. Ava looked at me without blinking. She was 16, old enough to recognize when an adult had answered the words of a question instead of the question itself. She placed the postcard beside the invitation. The lighthouse faced upward. My title did not. Patrick had not erased me all at once. That would have been easier to recognize. The first version of Michael's story had only been slightly smaller than the truth. It began during the last year of his life, when the infusion pump beside his chair sounded 3 short alarms every time the tube kinked beneath his blanket. Michael had pancreatic cancer and no patients left for ceremonial language. Patrick came to the hospital carrying 2 coffees, a legal pad, and a plan to create scholarships for the children of combat medics. Michael liked the scholarships. He hated the idea of being their symbol. "Make it about the teams," he told Patrick. Patrick nodded. Patrick always nodded before translating someone else's meaning into something easier to sell. The first biography said Michael had helped lead a rescue under fire. It was imprecise, it was incomplete, but it was not quite a lie. Patrick emailed it to me at 2 in the morning while I was sleeping upright in a vinyl chair beside Michael's hospital bed. I corrected the date of the mission, read the paragraph twice, and sent back 1 word. Approved. I did not know it then, but that word would become the most useful weapon Patrick ever held against me. After Michael died, helped lead became led, the operations cell disappeared. The convoy became Michael's convoy. My contribution moved from 1 vague sentence about coordination to a paragraph about the woman who waited at home and prayed for his return. Each change was small enough to forgive by itself. Together they created a life I had never lived. I ignored some because the scholarships mattered, because Helen had buried her son, and because Michael had known the truth. For a while that had felt like enough, and by the time the memorial invitation arrived, Patrick was no longer preserving Michael's story. He was testing how much of mine he could remove before I finally made a sound. I emailed Patrick that night. I would attend, but I would not approve the memorial program. He called the script meeting 2 days later. The Foundation conference room sat beneath a framed photograph of Michael carrying a wounded boy toward a helicopter. The image had become the Foundation's unofficial logo. Most people noticed Michael's arms around the child. I noticed the radio handset clipped to his vest. Patrick stood at the end of the table, turning a black presentation remote between his fingers even though there was no screen in the room. Helen sat beside him with a printed speech on cream paper. A silver paperclip shaped like the letter M held the pages together. Patrick slid the revised program toward me. Claire Donovan, Michael's devoted wife, waited through the longest night of his career and welcomed him home after the mission that defined his legacy. I placed the program back on the table. That is not accurate. Patrick gave me the patient expression he used when pretending a disagreement was only a problem of vocabulary. "You were his wife. Yes, you waited for him to return." After the mission ended, Helen shifted in her chair. Patrick stopped turning the remote. "We are not writing an operations report, Claire. We are telling a story people can understand. How much of the story are they allowed to understand?" His eyes hardened for less than a second. Then he opened a donor packet. The Foundation had 18 days before a funding committee voted on a 3-year grant worth $4.5 million. Patrick had already committed $312,000 from the reserve fund to the exhibition, media campaign, and memorial event. If the grant failed, the reserve would fall below the minimum required by the board. Patrick's salary was not mentioned. It did not need to be. "This is bigger than 1 sentence in a program," he said. 32 students are depending on the next funding cycle. He turned the donor packet so I could see the photographs. Medical students, nursing students, children of combat medics who had died or could no longer work. Patrick had placed the truth on one side of the table and 32 innocent students on the other. Helen touched the edge of my program. Michael wanted those scholarships. I know, he wanted his service to mean something after he was gone. It already did. The words came out colder than I intended. Patrick leaned forward. "No one is taking anything from you." That was the first moment I understood he knew he was. I pushed the program back across the table. "I will attend the memorial." "I will not approve this language." Patrick smiled without warmth. "We can note your concerns. You can remove my approval." His fingers tightened around the remote. Helen followed me into the hallway before I reached the elevator. She moved more slowly than she had the year before. Grief had not made her fragile. It had made every movement deliberate, as if she no longer trusted the floor to remain where she expected it. "Please don't turn this into a public fight," she said. "I didn't write the program. You know what I mean." I waited. Helen pressed the cream-colored speech against her chest. "One of the scholarship students is speaking at the memorial. Nell Brooks, her father served as a medic. After he died, the scholarship kept her in medical school. I'm glad. If the donors think the foundation cannot control its own family, they may delay the grant. It was not a threat, it was a request that I measure my dignity against the tuition bill of someone I had never met. I won't disrupt the memorial, I said. Relief moved across Helen's face too quickly. But I'm not approving the lie. Her relief disappeared. That night, after Ava went to bed, I opened the metal document box Michael and I had kept beneath the bottom shelf of my office closet. Inside were his discharge papers, insurance records, old identification cards, and the limited archive agreement I had signed when the foundation began using his photographs. Patrick had drafted it. I had signed it during the week after Michael's funeral, when every page placed in front of me seemed to contain more words than I could hold in my head. The agreement allowed the foundation to use Michael's personal letters, recordings, and photographs for educational purposes. It also contained one sentence Patrick apparently assumed I would never read again. Permission could be withdrawn if archival material was altered, falsely attributed, or presented in a way that materially misrepresented the people involved. I marked the page with a yellow tab. I did not call a lawyer. I did not contact the board. I still hoped Patrick would correct the program himself. The rehearsal destroyed that hope. A foundation volunteer sent me the recording afterward because I had declined to attend. Patrick stood on the museum stage beneath Michael's portrait and promised the donors something no previous exhibition had offered: an authentic uncut source recording from the rescue itself. Behind the glass wall of the sound booth, a technician placed a strip of red tape across the audio drive. Songso, Dr. Elise Warren, the military archivist assigned to the exhibition, entered the file into a transfer manifest on her tablet. Patrick had wanted authenticity because authenticity attracted donors. He had built the memorial around a recording he believed belonged to Michael. Somewhere inside the file he had promised not to cut was a voice he had spent 2 years removing from everything else. By the time Ava and I reached the museum, Patrick had turned the building into his version of Michael. His face hung 30 feet high above the entrance. In the photograph, Michael was smiling beneath a layer of dust, one hand gripping the strap of his medical bag. The image had been taken before the convoy mission, but the caption beneath it said otherwise. The night one soldier brought them home. A volunteer in a navy blazer checked our names against a seating chart. Mrs. Donovan, you and your daughter are in the family remembrance row. She pointed toward 6 chairs along the right wall. The donors sat in the center beneath the stage. Former soldiers and foundation board members filled the first 3 rows. Our seats were angled toward the audience rather than the screen, as though the important part of our presence was being seen grieving. Ava studied the layout. Did Uncle Patrick choose this? Probably. Do you want me to ask him? No, the agreement in my handbag allowed me to stop the recording. But Patrick would call it grief, Helen would call it a family dispute, and the exhibit would remain. So I sat where he had placed me. On the wall beside us, a paper poppy lifted in the cold air and flipped backward, exposing the small silver pin behind it. Ava noticed. Everything here looks like it's trying too hard not to move, she said. That sounded like something Michael would have said. Before the program, we walked through the new exhibition. His medic shears rested inside a glass case beside a faded aid bag. The metal was scratched near the hinge where he used to tap it against his knee when he was thinking. I had heard that sound across kitchens, airport terminals, and one hospital room we both knew he would not leave. The plaque beneath the case read, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, organized and commanded the rescue of 23 trapped vehicles, personally directing their withdrawal before entering hostile streets to recover the wounded. I read it twice. Michael had entered the street. He had pulled 2 injured diplomats and a local driver from the last vehicle. Nothing on that plaque needed to be invented to make him brave. But Michael had not organized the convoy. He had not commanded its withdrawal. He had not selected the western route. Ava moved closer to the glass. Where are you in this? I'm not. She turned toward me. I took out my phone and photographed the plaque. Patrick appeared behind us. He wore the dark suit he reserved for donor events, with a small foundation pin above his heart. His eyes moved from my phone to the plaque. Something wrong? You know what's wrong. We used the clearest version of the record. No, you used the clearest version of Michael. His smile tightened. The public does not need a tactical lecture. They need the truth. They need someone to remember. He glanced at Ava. And tonight is not about reopening old questions. The warning was quiet enough to sound polite. I put my phone away. No, I said, tonight appears to be about answering them for everyone. For the first time that evening, Patrick looked uncertain. Only briefly. Then a museum employee called him toward the stage, and the confidence returned to his shoulders before he had taken 3 steps. The memorial began with Nell Brooks. She was 23, nervous, and wore a small pin shaped like a lamp on the collar of her dress. She spoke about her father, a combat medic who had died after coming home. The Donovan scholarship had covered the year of medical school she otherwise would have lost. When she thanked Helen and Patrick, I understood exactly why Helen had told me her name. Nell was not part of the lie that mattered. Patrick followed her to the podium. He described Michael as a man who moved toward danger when others moved away. It was true, polished just enough that no one resisted it. Then he turned toward me. Michael's service demanded sacrifice from the whole family, he said. Claire's contribution was waiting for him to come home, raising their daughter, and giving him a life worth returning to. The audience looked at me, some smiled. Helen placed one hand over her heart. Patrick continued, Claire has supported this exhibition from the beginning, and we are grateful for her approval of the story we are preserving tonight. Ava stopped drawing on the edge of her program. Her pencil remained pressed to the paper, cutting a small gray hole through Patrick's printed name. Mom, she whispered, did you approve this? I looked at the photograph above the stage. Michael's image had become so large that the man himself had almost disappeared inside it. I had called my silence protection. Patrick had turned it into evidence for a life in which I had never been present, and now he was asking my daughter to inherit it. Not all of it, I said. Ava looked down at the postcard in my hand. I had taken it from my wallet without realizing it. For 14 years, I had carried Michael's words where no one else could read them. I placed the card in Ava's palm and folded her fingers over it. On stage, Patrick introduced the archival recording. He promised the audience they were about to hear Michael's courage exactly as it had happened. The lights dimmed, the convoy map appeared, then the speakers filled with static. And a younger version of me began to breathe in the dark. A young sergeant reported that the primary watch officer had been carried from the operations room after a blast struck the building across the courtyard. One radio channel had gone silent. I had been the designated alternate watch officer. My younger voice returned. Lantern assumes command. All elements acknowledge. The reply moved through the speakers one element at a time. Alpha copies, medical copies, rear security copies. The room had expected shouting or gunfire. Instead, it heard procedure. To the old soldier 3 rows ahead, it was anything but ordinary. Retired Sergeant Major Noah Bell had been introduced as one of Michael's former communications specialists and later the senior enlisted advisor for brigade communications. He wore a hearing aid behind his right ear. Now his hand stopped halfway to it. His eyes moved from the speakers to me. Patrick saw it. He raised the remote. The radio traffic continued. Lantern Eastern Route reports open. A marker on the museum map began moving along a red line. My younger voice answered without hesitation, negative. Kill Eastern Route, shift the convoy west. The red line vanished. A second path appeared in amber, cutting behind 3 blocks of unfinished buildings. Several donors looked down at their programs as if the explanation might be printed there. Patrick stepped toward the podium. For context, he said over the recording, Lantern was an operations call sign used inside the support cell. Used inside the support cell, accurate enough to survive. Small enough to mislead. Noah turned in his chair. Who was Lantern? Patrick did not look at me, an officer relaying battlefield information. My younger voice spoke again. Rear security, hold the 4th intersection. Medical, move to vehicle 23. Air, I need 9 minutes before fuel state forces your turn. The map answered each instruction. One marker stopped. Another reversed. A helicopter symbol began circling over the western edge. Ava stood beside me, the postcard still in her hand. She stared at the amber line. On the back of the card, Michael had drawn a crooked path beneath the lighthouse. I had always assumed it was one of his jokes, but the line curved west, then north, then west again. The same shape glowed above the stage, Mom, Ava whispered. That's the road, I nodded once. Patrick heard her. He lifted the remote, but Dr. Warren was already watching him from the aisle. The red Songso label remained visible through the sound booth glass. If he stopped the file, he would be stopping evidence he had promised was authentic. So he let it continue. A voice reported movement near the eastern checkpoint. Lantern, possible trigger vehicle on the original route. Confirmed distance, 2 blocks, keep everyone west. 23 convoy markers crawled along the amber line. The last one lagged behind. Vehicle 23 has wounded and cannot maintain speed. Michael's voice came through for the first time, medical moving back. His photograph filled the wall while his voice left cover. Helen pressed both hands together. Patrick lowered the remote. This was the part he understood, Michael becoming visible. Then my voice cut across his. Negative medical. You do not break from cover until rear security closes the intersection. A short silence followed. Michael answered, copy Lantern. No argument, he followed the order. Noah Bell stood. He faced Patrick, not me, that is not a support call sign. Patrick's expression held, but his remote dropped to his side. Noah pointed toward the map. A command net does not announce a transfer twice. Once Lantern assumed control, every element on that frequency answered to her. No one applauded. The room went still enough to listen. The convoy reached the western route. The final vehicle cleared the intersection. Then the eastern line flashed white. Static cracked through the speakers. Ava flinched. A black circle appeared over the original route. A voice reported the blast. 94 seconds after the reroute, Elise said, reading from the synchronized mission log. 23 vehicles had been moving toward that road. 14 soldiers, 9 medical personnel, 31 civilians. Patrick looked at the map as though the numbers had appeared there to accuse him. I watched the final marker join the others. For years, my part of that night had been reduced to coordination. The room had just heard a decision and watched 23 vehicles live long enough to obey it. Patrick pressed the remote. The audio stopped. He waited 2 seconds before speaking. Long enough to make the pause look respectful, short enough to keep anyone else from deciding what it meant. What you just heard, he said, was a support officer relaying instructions from senior command. The room loosened because Patrick had offered it somewhere comfortable to stand before the complicated explanation could finish forming. He gestured toward the frozen convoy map. Claire served honorably in an operations capacity. No one disputes that, but those decisions belonged to a larger command structure. Michael was the man on the ground carrying them out. Every sentence contained something true. That was how Patrick protected the lie inside them. I could have stood and corrected him. Instead, I looked at Noah Bell. He was still standing, Patrick noticed. Sergeant Bell, he said, smiling as if inviting agreement. You understand how many voices move through a joint operations center? I do, and how often call signs are used for positions rather than people. I do. Patrick's shoulders eased. Noah stepped into the aisle. But that was not a relay. The ease vanished. A relay repeats authority. It does not receive acknowledgments from every element. Assign fuel windows, hold rear security, and countermand a route already marked open. Patrick's jaw tightened. When Lantern assumed that net, command transferred. The people outside were not waiting for someone above her to approve those decisions. They were waiting for her. Noah gave the room something harder to dismiss than admiration procedure. Beside me, Ava opened her hand. The postcard had picked up a graphite line from her fingers. She looked from Michael's handwriting to the amber root frozen above the stage. You kept the light on, she whispered. I had spent years hearing that sentence as something private. A husband thanking his wife for staying steady. Ava heard it differently. He meant Lantern. The realization hurt because she was discovering how carefully I had taught her not to ask. Patrick returned to the microphone. Even if that interpretation is correct, archival audio can be assembled from multiple sources. Compression, synchronization, restoration, those processes can create impressions that were not present in real time. Dr. Elise Warren looked up from her tablet. Until then, she had remained seated near the aisle, wearing the restrained impatience of someone listening to a man misuse her profession. Patrick saw her. Dr. Warren can explain that better than I can. Yes, she said, I can. She turned the tablet toward the board members. The file played tonight came from the public release package transferred by the Army Historical Office. The source checksum matches the transfer manifest. The waveform contains continuous carrier noise across the command sequence. It was not assembled for this exhibit. Patrick looked toward the sound booth. The map animation was built from the time-stamped mission log, Elise continued, but the audio itself is continuous. What about restoration? Noise reduction was applied uniformly. No voices were inserted, moved, or combined. The black remote shifted in Patrick's hand. For the first time, it looked less like a tool than evidence that he had believed the room belonged to him. A board member leaned forward. Is there uncertainty about who held command? Elise glanced at Noah. The archive establishes what was said. Sergeant Bell has explained what those words meant operationally. Patrick stepped away from the microphone. The audience had watched him lose 3 explanations in less than 4 minutes. Support, higher command, reconstruction. Patrick looked toward the technician and drew a finger across his throat. The technician did not move. Elise tapped her screen. There is another segment in the source package. Patrick turned so quickly the foundation pin on his lapel caught the stage light. That portion was not approved for the program. It is included in the release manifest, Elise said. What portion? Helen asked. No one answered. On Elise's tablet beneath the command recording Patrick had tried to contain, a second file remained queued. Its label contained Michael's name. Patrick reached the sound booth before anyone else moved. That file is outside the approved program. Elise did not look up from her tablet. It is inside the public release package. It was not selected for presentation. You described the package as uncut. Patrick turned toward the board members as if the difference were obvious. This is a memorial, not an evidentiary hearing. Noah sat down. The room remained quiet. On Elise's screen, the second file waited beneath Michael's name. Its duration was less than a minute. Patrick looked at me. For the first time that night, he was not asking me to stay silent. He was counting on it. The archive agreement was still in my handbag. Michael's signature ran across the final page, the last letter of our surname dropping into the line below. I had seen him sign his name that way on school forms, hotel receipts, and the consent papers for the surgery that failed to save him. The foundation could use his voice. It could not use my silence to alter what his voice meant. Let it finish, I said, that was all. Elise nodded to the technician. Patrick's hand closed around the remote, but the screen behind him had already changed. The convoy map disappeared. A plain archive label replaced it. Supplemental operator note. Michael's breathing came first. Not the breathing of the man I had watched die. This was the stronger rhythm I remembered from doorways and early mornings, when he came home carrying too much gear and pretended his knees did not hurt. Someone off radio asked him to identify himself. Donovan. Medical element. A pause followed. Paper moved near the microphone. Then Michael said, add this to the report. Lantern got the convoy home. Make sure her name stays on it. The file should have ended there. Instead, Michael gave a small, tired laugh. She'll tell you it was the team. She'll be right. Put the team in first. Put her in it too. The speakers went silent. Ava's hand found mine. I looked at her because looking at Michael's photograph would have asked more of me than I had left. Patrick returned to the microphone. Michael was generous with credit. Everyone who knew him understood that. No one answered. He tried again. He was speaking about his wife after an emotional operation. That does not change the purpose of tonight. Helen lowered the speech she had been holding against her chest. She read the first page once. I watched her reach the sentence Patrick had written about me waiting at home. Then she folded the pages in half. The silver paper clip shaped like an M slipped free, struck the floor, and spun beneath the podium. I won't read this, she said. Patrick stared at her. Mom, I said I won't read it. It was not an apology, but it was the first time Helen had refused to help him repeat the lie. Patrick looked toward the dinner tables beyond the auditorium doors. We are already behind schedule. Elise was still working on her tablet. The archive office retained the exhibit correspondence, she said. Patrick's face changed, not shock, calculation. He knew what she might find because he knew what he had written. Elise looked down at her tablet. That correspondence belongs with the board, she said. They will have it by morning. Patrick looked at me then. For the first time that night, he was no longer trying to control the room. He was calculating what the room would learn after he left it. Patrick caught up with me in the corridor outside the auditorium. The doors had barely closed behind us when he said, "Do you understand what you just did?" Nell Brooks stood near the scholarship display at the far end of the hall. The small lamp pin on her collar reflected the overhead lights. I kept my voice low. I did not select the recording. You could have stopped it, so could you? His face tightened. That foundation exists because of Michael. No, it exists because people trusted what you told them about Michael. Patrick glanced toward Nell. If the donor committee delays the grant, students lose funding. Is correcting one paragraph worth that? It was Helen's bargain sharpened into an accusation: accept erasure or become responsible for everyone harmed when the lie collapsed. You committed reserve money before the grant was approved, I said. His expression answered before he did. You knew? The board packet was on the table. You have no idea what it takes to keep an organization like this alive. I know what it costs when one person decides survival excuses everything. Patrick stepped closer. You think Michael would want his name dragged through this? His name is the only one you did not drag through it. Nell lowered her eyes. She had heard enough to understand the scholarship was not as secure as the speeches had suggested. The correction could not end with Patrick being exposed. If I pulled Michael's archive and let the foundation collapse, innocent students would inherit his punishment. The emergency board meeting began at 9 the next morning. Michael's old chair remained empty at the end of the table. No one had planned it as symbolism. Patrick had simply never allowed anyone else to use it. The board had the exhibition photographs, the archive manifest, Patrick's email, and the clause in the release agreement I had marked with yellow tape. Elise placed the archived email thread on the screen above Michael's empty chair. The message was 6 weeks old. Patrick had sent it to the exhibit team after receiving the full source manifest. Remove the female command voice from the public sequence. It confuses the emotional center. Keep Claire in the family perspective section. Below that was another instruction: do not identify Lantern by name. The nearest board member read both lines twice. Patrick shifted in his chair. That is editorial shorthand. You told the room you did not know what the recording contained, Elise said. I did not know the final playback order. The board member pointed to the timestamp. You sent this before the program was built. Patrick looked at me then. The last explanation disappeared. He had known where I belonged and had placed me somewhere else. By then, Patrick no longer denied removing my voice. He defended why he had done it. We had 18 days before the funding vote, he said. The donors responded to Michael, not an operations chart. Not a chain of command. Him, and the $312,000? A board member asked. Already committed, without final grant approval. We needed momentum. Patrick looked around the table, searching for someone willing to confuse urgency with permission. I simplified the presentation. That is what communications people do. Dr. Warren sat near the door. Compression is not the same as false attribution, she said. Once the exhibit assigned another person's command decisions to Staff Sergeant Donovan, it stopped being simplification. Patrick turned toward Helen. Tell them what Michael meant to this foundation. Helen's folded memorial speech lay beneath her hands. Instead, she looked at me. What do you want? She was asking what outcome I intended to force. I placed the postcard on the table, lighthouse facing upward. 3 things. Patrick gave a tired laugh, I continued. The exhibition is corrected before the donor review. It names the operations team, the medical element, and every unit cleared for public identification. No one interrupted. Second, the foundation may continue using Michael's archive for education and scholarships. It may not use it to assign other people's work to him. Patrick's laugh disappeared. Third, Patrick loses final editorial authority. He pushed his chair back. So this is revenge? No. I looked at Nell's scholarship file among the papers. Revenge would be easy. I could withdraw the archive this morning and let you explain the empty museum to the donors. The room stayed quiet. I'm asking you to preserve the scholarships and correct the record. Both. If the foundation cannot survive the truth about the man whose name it carries, then Patrick has already destroyed it. The vote was not unanimous. 2 board members wanted to postpone the correction until after the grant decision. One wanted Patrick suspended but retained as a consultant. Helen cast the deciding vote. Patrick stared at her. You are choosing her over your own son. Helen closed her eyes. No, she said, I am choosing what Michael asked us to protect. Patrick looked toward the empty chair. For a moment, he looked like an older brother who had built a machine from grief and realized it no longer belonged to him. He left without the remote. It remained on the table beside the folded speech and my postcard. I picked up the card. The remote stayed where it was. The false plaque came down 6 days later. A museum technician loosened the 4 brass screws while a foundation board member checked the donor deadline on her phone. The paper poppy beside the display caught the air conditioning again. But this time a curator reached up and secured it before it could turn backward. The words Michael Donovan commanded the rescue disappeared beneath a sheet of protective cloth. No ceremony, no cameras, just metal being removed from a wall. The replacement text did not call me a hero. I had refused that word during the review. It identified the Joint Operations Cell, the convoy security element, the medical team, and the publicly cleared units involved. It explained that Captain Claire Donovan assumed operational control after the command network was disrupted and ordered the route change that prevented 23 vehicles from entering the eastern ambush. Michael's paragraph remained. It described what he had actually done. He returned for the final vehicle. He stabilized 3 wounded people under fire. He refused extraction until the local driver had been secured. Nothing true about Michael became smaller when my name was restored. Patrick had mistaken history for a stage where more light on one person meant less for another. The donor committee postponed its vote for 48 hours. Then it approved the grant, not without conditions. The foundation would undergo an outside governance review. Archival descriptions required independent verification. Patrick's employment ended immediately, though the board allowed him to retain health coverage through the end of the year. Helen agreed to step down as chair after a 6-month transition. The scholarships remained. When Nell Brooks heard the decision, she touched the lamp-shaped pin on her collar and cried without making a sound. She owed me nothing. The students had never been the price of my dignity. Patrick had only placed them there because he assumed I would not move if innocent people stood behind him. The exhibition reopened in December under a new title. The team that brought them home. Ava came with me on a Wednesday afternoon when the museum was nearly empty. She stopped in front of the convoy map before reading any of the text. The red eastern route remained visible as a faded possibility. The western route glowed amber. At its end, the 23 vehicle markers gathered around a small point of light. No portrait occupied the center of the wall, only the route. Only the names. Ava read Michael's first, then mine. She did not look surprised this time. She looked relieved. Helen stood near the entrance. She had asked permission to come, which told me more than an apology would have. We had spoken twice since the board meeting. Both conversations were polite. Neither repaired what had happened. Some relationships do not return after the truth arrives. That is not always cruelty. Sometimes trust cannot be rebuilt on schedule. Helen approached the display case. I should have asked more questions, she said. Yes, she waited for me to make the answer gentler. I did not. After a moment, she nodded. The foundation had requested the original postcard for the exhibition. I gave them a high-resolution copy instead. The replica rested beneath the map, beside Michael's supplemental statement. Visitors could read the sentence in his handwriting. You kept the light on, we followed it home. The original remained in my wallet. Its corners were softer now. A faint graphite mark crossed one edge where Ava had held it during the memorial. I used to think loyalty meant carrying another person's version of the past without disturbing it. I was wrong. Loyalty is refusing to let the people you love become simpler after they are gone, and protecting the names of those who never had a photograph large enough to hang above a stage. Patrick wanted one hero because one hero was easy to sell. Michael had wanted the team. In the end, the truth gave him what his family had not. Truth did not make Michael smaller. It placed his courage beside the judgment of the operations cell, the discipline of the security teams, and every person who kept moving when the road ahead disappeared. Light belonged to everyone who carried it. Ava needed the whole story, including the names left outside the frame. If you have ever been edited out of a story you helped to build, you know that being seen is not the same as demanding attention. Sometimes it only means refusing to disappear. Tell me which moment stayed with you most, and share this with someone whose quiet service deserves to be named. Subscribe if history should make room for the whole team. They called me only his widow, until the memorial played the voice that brought them home.